Great.
There you go.
Welcome, everybody, to the Senate Democratic Caucus. It's the 9th of March, and it's good to have you. I am Allison Clarkson, Senator from Windsor County, and we are today going to be addressing two areas that we're going to be working on and will be presented during the crossover. The first bill that we're going to be looking at and discussing is S30, which is in Senate Judiciary, and is a bill that relates to prohibiting firearms in government buildings at the moment with a study. And so I'm going to turn to Senator Sears and Senator Baruth to lead our conversation and discussion. And then we are going to, about halfway point, we'll pivot to the discussions and some of the issues we're addressing in our changes to the unemployment insurance bill in our unemployment insurance, and Mike and Senator Sorokin will be leading us in that discussion. So Senator Baruth and Sears, we turn to you.
Appreciate you turning to us. We're turning to you. We have a bill that has turned out to be much more controversial than I expected. To be honest, that would have banned firearms in government buildings, hospitals, and childcare facilities. We heard testimony from the Attorney General, the Treasurer, the Auditor of Accounts, and the Secretary of State, who all supported in terms of government buildings. However, as we looked at the bill, there was it's important as to what government buildings are we talking about. All government buildings, and is it the other argument went with there are already laws in the books that would be able to be enforced if somebody enters into, for example, a hospital with a firearm. And that was one of the big arguments between the pro and the con on this. And I'll let Phil go into more detail, but that was a great deal was is there laws in the book to cover this activity? Are there constitutional rights involved? And the right to carry in Vermont under the 16th.
Excuse me, Senator Sears, I'm just going to ask everybody to mute themselves because I'm hearing some background noise, which is
that's probably coming from my wife and others. So that's basically the argument was a constitutional one as well. You have a right to carry to defend yourself. About a year ago, I had a conversation before COVID shutdown. I had a conversation with a lobbyist for the sportsmen's groups. And I said, I don't understand why in the world somebody needs to carry a firearm into a hospital. That's where the conversation went. And as this bill developed, our focus became on the hospitals, particularly with the number of serious cases that arrive in hospitals. And so the amendment that we're preparing to vote out would do two things. One would you cannot carry a firearm into the hospital. And it would knowingly carry into a hospital, by the way. We had many examples where somebody was having a heart attack and they went into the hospital to recover from the heart attack and they had a gun on them. You obviously didn't know, you weren't knowingly carrying the gun into the hospital. And that's where the amendment stands right now. And I'll let Senator Baruth take it from there. We also would have a study of the Capitol, the Capitol building itself, the State House. There's been some discussion about studying the Capitol complex as well.
Thanks, Dick. So I'm a supporter, obviously, of the original bill, which had the three pieces, um, and it seemed to me that they were all necessary. Um, Having heard the testimony we've heard, I still support the original bill in the three pieces, but you know, we're all aware that a bill has to get out of committee and you have to compromise. And I've appreciated the chair's efforts to reach a compromise with me. So I just wanted to give a little background. Uh, I I think there's almost no grounds for a constitutional argument here, and I'll point people to the Heller case, which was decided with a majority opinion by Antonin Scalia. Doesn't get more conservative. And that case, the Heller case, held for the first time that the Second Amendment protected an individual's right to bear arms for self-defense. But I want to read you a caveat in that decision. It's one sentence. And again, this is Justice Scalia. Quote, "Nothing in our opinion should be taken to cast doubt on longstanding prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings." So that is rock solid support from the Supreme Court for this kind of bill. I want to say that right now in state law, there are two locations protected by a state law prohibiting firearms: schools and courthouses. Those were put forward in 1989 and 1993. And those discussions also turned on whether you needed an additional law or whether existing law, including the trespass statute, which was around since 1969, whether that was sufficient. In both those cases, courthouses and schools, the legislature decided the trespass statute and other statutes were insufficient, and they wanted an additional level of protection, statewide, uniform, not a administrative rule or an attempt to stretch the trespass statute to cover the problem. So from my point of view, I believe in a world where we just saw all 50 states close their state houses because of threats having to do with insurrection in the Capitol, that seemed a no-brainer to me. In terms of hospitals, we've all seen violence around public health measures, the wearing of masks, enforcing the wearing of masks. And we had very compelling testimony around hospitals in committee. We had testimony from a Brattleboro high school student who was in the Dartmouth hospital around the time when there was a shooting there. We had testimony from the doctors who said that they have sometimes had to engage in arguments with people who bring in firearms about whether they have a constitutional right to carry. And I would state and stress that on the hospital side, we have not heard any opposition from any of the hospitals, doctors, nurses, physicians groups, health association. They are completely unified in their request, urgent request for this. The last thing I want to say about the trespass statute, which we've talked a lot about in committee, it's Title 13, 3705. And if you read it, it says that you're trespassing if you come onto the property, which is marked with a sign, and you come on without legal authority. And the thing is that the argument stems from, in part, that phrase and the dispute around whether someone has legal authority by virtue of the Vermont Constitution or the US Constitution to carry into a marked building. So I would say that for me, the existing laws are not sufficient. We do need a uniform state prohibition on firearms in hospitals. I'm glad that the strike all that we have in front of us also directs a study on the State House complex. I believe Senator Sears and I both agreed to that. So it seems to me that we would be taking action on government buildings for the future, but we would right now be prohibiting firearms in hospitals. And given what I've seen on the news in the last year and what we heard in testimony in committee, that seems to me the overriding need. So I'll leave it there with the understanding that other people may want to disagree with what I said or present other arguments.
Allison, you're muted. Senator Clarkson, you're muted.
Great. May I just clarify, you are open to expanding the study to consider all of the Capitol complex and not just the State House?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Terrific. Any questions or clarifying? And Cheryl, help me if you, Senator Serrano.
I'm sorry if I missed this. So the controversy around the State House is purely one on constitutional basis, or are people somehow arguing they need to bring a firearm into the State House?
If I could, Dick. I think there we heard testimony from BGS and other administrative people, including Mike Sherling, that they didn't oppose the bill. They made it clear that they didn't think it was necessary because there are administrative rules in place that they believe give them the authority that they need. With that said, an administrative rule is not a state law. And this is an administration that, absent the Fairhaven plot, has always said that our laws are sufficient around firearms issues. So it wasn't a surprise to me that several heads of agency didn't see need for additional protection. But that, I think, was more the disagreement around the government buildings, with the addition of what Senator Sears said, which was defining them and limiting what you were talking about proved difficult.
So I guess I'm still unclear. So there's an administrative rule which has the force and effect of law right now that prohibits people from bringing firearms into the State House?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Senator White.
I think Senator White.
So I know people have a lot of questions, and I know that a number of you are aware that I have opposed this bill. I am a co-sponsor of it, but on the testimony that we received, and I'm just going to tell you my reasons, and then I'm not going to say any more. But in my mind, this is not a constitutional issue. It whether there's a reason to have a gun in any of these places or not is not a question I'm asking. But what we heard from the Defender General in particular was that there are other ways of enforcing the prohibition of guns in these areas. And Philip is right that the administration probably is of one mind here, and so that was not surprising. But we heard, and I'm going to say something about the lawful authority that in the trespass bill. What that means is that if you have, that you can be ejected from a facility if someone has the lawful authority to do so. So if I go down to the Putney General Store and I don't have a shirt on, and it says no shirt, no service, and I don't have a shirt on, the customer next to me can't tell me to get out because he has no no lawful authority to do so. But the person behind the desk, behind the counter, can tell me to get out because he has lawful authority. And so the way this would work now is that I enter one of these premises with a firearm, and I'm asked to leave or to take the gun out, and I don't do it. So then the person calls law enforcement and arrests me for trespass. The way it would be under the new provision is that I enter the place with a gun and I'm asked to leave, and then there's the same scenario. I either do or I'm arrested because there's a law against it, or I'm not asked to leave and somebody arrests me immediately, assuming that law enforcement is there. That's the difference. And so because I see no reason to have a gun in any of these places, but because we already have laws in effect to prohibit them and to arrest people who violate those prohibitions, it's really hard for me to support this.
Any other thoughts or concerns or questions people have? Bobby, is that your hand? Senator Starr?
You're muted, Bobby.
Bobby, you're muted.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Phil, why can't the hospital already have a prohibition against carrying guns at the hospital?
Thanks, Bob. They do. They have rules. They've made policies against it. And most of them have signs. They are still asking very, very, pleading might be the word, for this because they believe it will give them a stronger case and they won't have to argue as much. So what Jeanette was saying is true. Right now, you have to give someone notice of trespass, meaning that a hospital employee has to go up to them, to the armed person, and say, you have to take your weapon outside. And then if there's an argument, then go call the police. But we had a doctor who spoke about the minutes occupied with arguing with someone. The other thing I would say is that everybody here, I'm sure, has seen video of what's happening in various states, including Vermont, around the masking rules. So, there's constantly video coming out of people being trespassed out of stores because they're not wearing a mask. And there are fights, there are arguments, and they always turn around the fact that these people don't believe the trespass statute, which is being stretched to cover this, is enough. They believe that there's no state or federal law requiring them to wear a mask. And they cite this again and again and again in these videos. And I would say it's the same thing, but worse, with someone who's convinced that they have the right to constitutionally carry, concealed or unconcealed, into a hospital or a government building. I don't want to have that argument with them. The last thing I would say real quickly is the prohibition on schools has been broadly effective as a deterrent. We had testimony that no one could remember someone being prosecuted for a gun at a school because people know there's a state law and they don't carry it there. So you don't have incidents where you have these kind of points of friction. So that's what we're looking to do with this bill, is create a broad statewide prohibition that's above a hospital's policy or an administration's rule, and that communicates across the board to people, hospitals should not be mixed with guns.
Yeah, thanks,
Senator
Phil.
Chittenden and then Senator Hardy. Oh, I'm sorry, Bobby, were you finished?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm the new guy and I'm new to the fray on this, and I just want people to know where I stand and why I'm a co-sponsor of this. And I really appreciate Senator Bruce's argument there. I fully support the original language, but I'm happy that things are moving forward. And I just want to pick up on what Senator Bruce just offered. We need greater clarity. I always like to equate cars with guns. Cars are dangerous weapons and they can be used that way, but it's really clear where you can drive a car and where you can't drive a car. You can't drive a car on a public beach. You can't drive a car in a city park. You can't drive a car on a playground. I think those are clarities that have been achieved through standard regulations. And that's why I think it's very straightforward to say you can't bring guns into schools. You can't bring guns into hospitals, and you can't bring guns into government buildings. And then working through the rest of it with the clarity that I think the bill has offered all comes afterwards. But we need that clarity so that we can achieve some of the same safeties we've achieved and reduce deaths on our roadways through standard motor vehicle rules to our guns.
Senator Hardy and Senator Sears.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I thank you, Phil, for laying this out so clearly. And I also just want to point out that there's a big difference between a t-shirt and a gun. A gun is a weapon that can be used against somebody, and it creates this situation where there's somebody who is armed and could be dangerous if they get angry. And I think it's really unnecessary and unfortunate to put hospital administrators or doctors or nurses in that position where they could be at risk with somebody who has a loaded weapon. And as a school board member, when we did have instances of somebody bringing a gun onto a school campus, it was usually a student who had been out hunting in the morning and had their gun in their truck in the morning and forgot to take it out or didn't go home to take it out. And as a school board member, it was helpful to have the law behind us to say, this is not okay. This is state law. This is not our rule. And to have the protection of state law as a school board member and to not even have to be in the position of really, any kind of gray area. I appreciate that there's going to be some sort of study related to public buildings. And I'm wondering, Phil, I heard that there was testimony that was unclear or led to you taking out childcare facilities. I can't see in the witnesses who might have had that testimony. So I'm wondering, was there any talk of trying to do a study for further looking into the childcare facility issue?
I'd like to answer that.
Okay.
First of all, in the child care centers, Commissioner Brown testified that he felt it would hurt his relationship already. There already are rules within the regulations. And since some child care centers are in people's homes, that was his basic testimony.
I'm sorry, Dick, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Can you stay closer to I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
No, none of.
Okay. I'm sorry. All right. When Commissioner Brown testified, he stated, we have not had any issues with the implementation of the regulations or the enforcement of those regulations. He also suggested that if S30 was passed, it could complicate our ability to continue to regulate in a way we have in the relationship we've established to our providers who are used to the rules and working within the rules that are already established, which is no firearms are available to the students or anyone else in the child care facility. I think that that was basically why the child care facilities were dropped. I want to mention on the hospitals, one of the things to keep in mind and why I strongly support the hospital issue is it's a place where one doesn't expect to have to deal with firearms. One goes into, not that you should have to expect to deal with them in the grocery store either, but you're in the hospital for a different reason. And you're there to seek help or whatever with either a physical or a mental issue, and having someone with a firearm sitting next to you in the emergency room could further exacerbate already difficult situations. And I think there was just strong, as Bill mentioned, strong testimony from nurses and doctors. And I think this was a time that I particularly listened to those professionals and wanted to.
Thank you. Anything further? I think what I'd, but before Jeanette, what I'd add is that we don't have a primary seatbelt law either. But just having it even as a secondary law, I mean, I think people comply with laws when they know it's a law. We have huge compliance in this state without without having to enforce it. And I think to go to Senator Hardy's point about the schools, the confidence of just knowing that there is a law and people, the education that circulates around a law means people tend to comply with our laws, which is great. Senator White, and then we're going to move, unless there are other questions, we're going to move to Senator Serrano.
I just wanted to say I shouldn't have used the example of not wearing a t-shirt because I realized that there's a huge difference between a shirt and a gun. What I was trying to do is explain what lawful authority means, is that anybody who is there as an employee has the lawful authority to tell you to leave under the no trespass law. That's what lawful authority means.
Actually, if I could, Jeanette, I might be wrong, but the statute, the phrase lawful authority applies to the person or doesn't apply to the person coming onto the property, not the person who owns the property. So what it says is if you come onto the property without legal authority, you're subject to the statute. But there's where the argument comes in, is somebody who believes strongly in Sportsman's Bill of Rights or, Vermont Constitution, US Constitution, Second Amendment, will say, I do have legal authority. And then what you're talking about, whether you're the owner of the property, is a different question of legal authority.
Thank you. And I would encourage senators, if they have additional questions or concerns, to please direct them to Senators Baruth and Sears. I think we're going to, given it's almost 1:15, we're going to switch to another discussion, which really involves a lot of our core values, which I'm going to send over to Senator Serrano for discussion of our unemployment insurance changes that we're considering.
Thank you, Allison. I apologize in advance for the dryness of the subject matter I'm about to embark upon after that conversation, which is very emotional, I'm sure, for all of us, especially in light of what happened in January. So we're actually working on three separate, well, not necessarily separate, but three distinct unemployment insurance issues right now, and they're all COVID related. Tomorrow, I'll be very brief. We're going to be fast tracking a bill that the administration urged us to pass immediately on Friday before the vacation, and it exercises an option that Congress gave us on December 27th to allow people to use their past earnings of the last year, their benefit levels, to continue at those benefit levels for the extended benefit program, which the Biden plan is now probably going to extend until Labor Day. If we don't pass this, people will have to start a new benefit year, which they will have little or no earnings because of the pandemic, and their benefit checks would be cut substantially. It's a win-win-win bill because these benefits through September will all be federal dollars, where if we didn't pass this, whatever limited benefits people would get would be state dollars. It's a win on the part of the department because they would have to do yeoman's administrative work. We might see another nightmare as they'd have to go back and reopen every claim to process them manually. So you'll be seeing that tomorrow. I'll try and explain in a little bit more detail. It gets very weedy, but we're going to ask for a rule suspension tomorrow. The House is waiting for it, and the governor needs to sign this bill by Friday for us to get all the benefits that it can afford the state and the claimants in this context. The second bill is somewhat familiar in that it is another bill extending a sunset because of the fact that the pandemic has lasted so much longer than people have expected. Last year, actually, I think it was last May or June, we changed the unemployment law in many respects to make people who leave their job due to COVID, to a COVID-related reason, even though it's a personal reason, like they get sick or they have to care for a child at home, to draw unemployment benefits, and for their employer not to have their experience rating changed negatively because that employee received benefits. We had a sunset date on that of March 31st. So we need to extend that, and we're going to extend it till the emergency order is lifted, and probably a month beyond that for administrative reasons. The third proposal is one we don't have a bill yet on, but we're considering adding to the bill I just talked about. And you may have heard about this, is that last year, I should say in September, the administration came in and wanted to give about $36 million in rate relief to employers because of the arcane formula that exists in unemployment, as how you set the contribution rates. Because there was so much unemployment due to the pandemic, the rates for the employer community were going to go up precipitously. The House passed that. The Senate rejected it on the basis of the fact that that change does not have to take place until July 1st of this year. Everything was so fluid, going up and down. We didn't have all the information. We had enough time to work on it. That's what we're doing now, to get something on this if we felt it appropriate. In the interim, the administration has essentially come back and tripled the amount of relief they want to see for the employer community in terms of their contribution rates by changing the schedule and changing the amount of taxes, amount of wages that are taxed for each individual employee. They want to freeze it for at least a year. We've been talking in our committee. One of the things we learned through a lot of testimony, a lot of charts and numbers, is that the unemployment trust fund is doing incredibly well compared to what was projected in 2009 and 10 for some of you veterans who were around. We were dealing with a trust fund that went into the negative, but had been hovering around $250 million at its best. Now it's projected, even with COVID, to be getting into the $1 billion range. So I think we can clearly afford this help to the employers. I think we also can afford a little additional help to employees as we make this this temporary transition. Being a veteran of those discussions 10 years ago, it was always talked about a grand bargain of sharing the pain between employees and employers. And I think there should be some equity in what comes forth out of our committee. And we're getting down to the wire, and we should have a recommendation probably on Thursday for the full Senate.
Senator McCormick, and then Senator Starr and Senator Kitchell. You're muted, Senator McCormick.
Sorry. If I'm not mistaken, the emergency order is supposed to expire at the end of this month. Is that correct? Or is it your expectation that it'll be continued?
I certainly don't have an answer to that.
Okay.
I don't know. This particular bill that I was talking about would extend the benefit eligibility and the charge experience rating relief to employers to at least a month beyond that, so that the trust fund and the Department of Labor can properly administer it.
Yeah.
So whenever that executive order expires, the sunset on this new bill will be at least 1 month after that.
Yeah, but that's specific to that. And what I'm getting at is that there are a lot of other provisions that are for the duration of the executive order, so that they expire when the executive order expires, if my understanding is correct.
Pretty much everything we passed last year
Yeah,
presently expires on March 31st and would be continued till a month or so after the executive order is lifted. So if you come down with COVID, a week after the executive order is lifted, you'll still be eligible to get benefits, and the employer wouldn't be charged for them.
okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Senator,
thank you. Quickly, Michael, the charge of the relief to the employers, is that in all unemployment cases or just pandemic employment, or what's involved there?
No, it's just for benefits that are paid out of our trust fund. The relief, yes. I mean, the relief to employer is based upon the circumstances of the separation, and that applies to all benefits that go out. So it's if it's a voluntary quit, usually the employer doesn't have to get charged. If it's a layoff, the employer does get charged.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
okay. Senator Kitchell.
Yes, Michael, you said something about the trust fund, $1 billion. And I was just trying to recollect, it seemed to be prior to pandemic, the trust fund was a little more than 530 million. And then it had dropped down into the 300 range. Could you just explain the billion?
The billion is, I mean, you're probably not remembering as much as I did, but there's these charts they put out on a 10-year forecast. And even with the trust fund going from 500 to 250 presently, they're now projecting that in the out years, it's going to be about $1 billion. So it's with all the assumptions they put in. So they're projecting a very healthy trust fund. And in my mind, what that says is we overreached in 2009 and 10. We did a great job in making the fund healthy, but I guess in hindsight, we didn't have to hit the employer community as hard, and we didn't have to hit workers as hard, because now, at least going forward, it looks like it's, we already had the healthiest trust fund in the United States. It looks even more so at this point projecting forward.
Any other questions? I don't think so. If any occur, because I know employers are beginning to be in touch. I know in our neck of the woods, we've had a couple employers be in touch. So you may hear the chamber has put things out on this. And so you may begin to hear from employers and hopefully employees. But we're hoping to vote this out Thursday. Is that right, Michael?
Yes.
Great. Christopher Bray, I see one more question.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up to Senator Kitchell's question. Senator Srotkin, so this is probably an abundance of caution kind of question. I think we're all suffering the effects of the pension hangover, and that was based on projections. So you've been in the midst of that. Are you reasonably confident that even with these changes, we're not going to beguile ourselves into thinking we'll be fined 5, 6, 7, 10 years hence and end up in a pinch?
That's a great question, Senator Bray. In fact, one of the nuances in the bill that I did not mention, at least in the short term, there will be a review in December of 2021, and we haven't come up with the exact number, but unless the trust fund is over a couple of 100,000 or something like that, these changes won't go into effect. So there's a governor on it that we're going to be looking before they make these changes next in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we're going to end here because we have, as you know, our joint assembly in 3 minutes. So thank you, everybody. This was terrific. And